Welcome, everyone, to the Asian Voices Radio podcast, where you'll find real Asian American conversations and those topics that you're too afraid to ask your Asian parents. I'm your host, Rasha Goel, and I am so thrilled to be talking to my guest today, someone who I've known for a couple of years and who is just a fascinating human being and phenomenal. He's an Academy Award-nominated South Asian filmmaker whose works include St. Louis Superman, The Brid, Habibi, Koya, and The Last Out, which received a special jury, the Albert Maysles New Documentary Director Award at the 2020 Tribeca Film Festival. He's got his hands in film and television, a lot going on. Sami Khan, welcome to our show today. How are you?
Good. Thanks so much for having me, Rasha. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, same here. And it's such a pleasure to have you on Asian Voices Radio. Now, I know you're busy. You've got a lot going on with film and television, but I'm sure that your Oscar nomination for St. Louis Superman in 2020 kicked off a lot for you. So could you tell us what it's been like for you since that nomination?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a little bit surreal because COVID happened right after. We got like the Oscars in right under the wire, February 9th or something like that, 2020. And everything started, kind of blowing up. And then we shifted to this Zoom life. So it still feels kind of like a dream. And I am incredibly busy, but I try and take a step back and just, appreciate where I am. And, even when I catch myself complaining about, being overworked, I just think back 5 years and be like, would I be happy with where I am right now? And of course the answer is yes. So getting nominated for an Academy Award, especially if you are a filmmaker who's outside the mainstream, whether you're South Asian or, from a marginalized community, it does matter. People say it doesn't matter, but it does. It's materially, tangibly, it changes how people perceive you. It helped me level up tremendously. And I don't go out pursuing awards. I'm driven by the work and by my relationships with other creatives, but it does help sort of get things done.
Well, I can imagine it's such a huge recognition, and like you said, it kind of helps open those doors that perhaps weren't opening before. I'd love to talk to you more about this documentary film, which is about activism, a rapper, a former politician, Bruce Franks Jr. Now, you co-directed this film with Smriti Mundra. So did you two know each other before, or how did this all come together for you?
Oh, yeah. Smriti is one of my best friends. We went to Columbia together. We didn't know each other before going to Columbia Film School. But on the first day, it was the first day that I went to Columbia, I met Christian, who would eventually become Smriti's boyfriend and now husband. And so Christian is one of my best friends. And Christian and Smriti didn't end up meeting until the last year of film school. And they really hit it off. And then we were all in New York, and they eventually moved to Los Angeles. And, sort of absence makes the heart grow fonder. And we became even better friends when they moved to LA. I would, I always stay with them. They give me a really hard time if I come to LA and I don't see them. A really hard time, actually. But yeah, and so we kind of, she was shooting her feature doc in India around the same time I was shooting a feature film in India, and we would compare notes, crews, etc. And then we were looking for the right project to work together on. And, Poe, the producer, approached us, and it was, happens. It was lightning in a bottle. It was like the collision of so many, fortuitous things. And of course, where Bruce Franks Jr., the doc subject, where he was in his life, was really central, but also Smriti and I's friendship. And, one of the things with COVID is, unfortunately, Smriti and I, we tried, but we haven't been able to get a green light for one of the projects we've been working on. That's been, that's like the next thing, is like to find the follow-up for, all of us, also Bruce Franks and Poe, the producer, But it was this family that came together to tell the story. And all of us were in like these unique, times in our life that made us really the perfect storytellers to be there to capture Bruce's story.
I love that you had a friendship with this. And I did see the film. Where can people watch St. Louis Superman?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're in the United States, it's on Paramount Plus. It's on like Pluto TV. It's also, if you don't have those, you can rent it, I believe, on Apple TV Plus and those platforms. If you're internationally, it's on YouTube. So if you're outside the U.S., you can watch it on YouTube. But in the U.S., it's Paramount Plus is like the most accessible way to watch it.
Great. I highly encourage everyone listening to this to watch the film. It really is very powerful. Before I move on to other topics too, Sami, I have to ask you because it's kind of rare to see co-directors. We normally see one director on a film. And so for this, what was your experience like? Was it challenging having two people, two captains that were steering the ship?
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging in any creative endeavor. It's challenging when, there's two people. But if you're friends with somebody, you have an affinity with them creatively and thematically, then, that can help overcome stuff. But, I think Smriti and I have great complementary skills. I'm somebody who likes to film and kind of do everything myself. I shot 85% of the film, did most of the sound work, edited, although I'm not credited as an editor, edited a lot of the film as well. And Smriti has this like drive and ambition. She found Bruce's story. She has this very persuasive manner. So when Bruce was kind of reluctant to open the door to us, she was very persuasive in convincing him and his aide at the time to allow us in. And then again, like where we were at in our lives, Smriti was very interested in sort of mental health and trying to, unpack what that would mean for somebody like Bruce. And my wife actually works in mental health. She's a clinical social worker and a therapist. So that's also the world, that I'm steeped in. And one of my wife's best friends was like in St. Louis, living in St. Louis, and knew Bruce. So it was this like I said, lightning in a bottle where
that's the universe conspiring for you right there.
Seriously, it was. I mean, it really was. And I wish that would happen on every project, to be honest.
We all do. I want to go back a little bit to your growing up. So you're originally from Ontario, Canada. And what was life growing up as a South Asian in Canada, and who inspired you or motivated you to pursue a career in the film industry?
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up in the second most racist town in Ontario, Canada. Apparently,
wow.
We measured it in terms of hate crimes, etc. And so it's this blue collar town, which is on the shore of Lake Huron and right on the border with Michigan, and like it's basically embedded with the Michigan town, especially growing up like before 9/11. Like the border was super porous. Like you could just go over there and just show your birth certificate. You didn't even need a driver's license, let alone a passport. So I grew up in this kind of, not so diverse place. It was kind of rough and tumble. But then I was connected to this broader world, obviously Michigan, Toronto, India, and always dreamed of getting out. What was my ticket to get out of there? And, my parents being immigrants and my father being a huge movie buff who would, put on Hitchcock movies, Jaws, etc. when we were way too young to be watching those movies. Still, it gave me an appreciation of cinema. And as he was trying to, learn the social cues of this adopted country, I was also appreciating that, but the craft of filmmaking. And, he bought it's like the cliche, like he bought a camcorder. I basically stole it and started using it. I started working at the local cable access channel in town and hooking up VCRs. And, I was interested in telling stories. If I was born 20, 30 years later, I probably would want to be a writer. But there was something about film and video that, my skills had a connection to. And of course, I grew up in this, second most racist town in Ontario, Canada. I had no idea of how to actually make a career in the business, so I was like a little bit of a late bloomer, but it's just because I didn't have any interface with the industry. I didn't have any connections. And it was through developing, my relationships with collaborators that eventually, a decade after film school or so, things started to really take off.
So it's fair to say then, for someone who's listening to our conversation right now, if they're also in a place where they don't necessarily have a mentor or direction, that it's important to collaborate, right? Network with people, meet people, understand what they're doing. What would you say on that aspect?
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of the adage, like, find your people. You have to find
your tribe.
Yeah, find your tribe. Find the people who, will, yes, make you better creatively, and you can, steal their creative brilliance, but also support you, because the business is so difficult. I mean, this, you put yourself out there almost every minute of every day, almost every, waking hour, you put yourself out there. There's so much rejection, and I think this is, when I was younger, I was naive. And even 5-10 years ago, I thought, it's like being successful means like not being rejected. That's not true. It's like being successful means you're getting rejected more, but you have like you're leveled up. So it's like the wins, the successes resonate and give you career stability, but that takes a toll on your mental health. So how do you manage that crazy business? And I think having your tribe, having your people around you to keep you sane, to support you when it's like a string of rejections. It's like, oh my God, what's the next paycheck going to be? But then also to keep you honest when you think you're the hottest thing, and you're really not. There's always somebody out there, or dozens, if not hundreds, of people who who are hotter than you are, or more talented, or have more going for them. So it's like that yin and yang that you have to balance, that you really need strong relationships, both creatively and just emotionally.
I'm so glad you shared that, Sami, because I think that's so important. And it's something we don't talk about a lot. I mean, I'm in the same, shoes as you are, and I deal with that on an everyday basis as well. And I think both you and I are active on social media, so people do see the glory and the glam part of it, but it's really then coming back and being grounded. So thank you for sharing that. I'm also fascinated about the different works that you're involved in. Now, I know a lot of it is non-fictional, but you do work on some fictional stories. Talk to me about what interests you the most. Like what touches your heart and inspires you to tell the stories that you do?
Yeah, I mean, one, it is those relationships, or connecting back to that previous answer. I am interested in working with good people who are doing good stuff. And that's like first step. And, I do tend to avoid people that I know I won't connect with. And then, it is like, what is the material? What is the project itself? And, can I connect to the themes? And, and that varies, on a superficial level. I'm working on a very low budget digital food travel series for public broadcasting with a good friend that, we'll tell you about later in a couple of months when it comes out. And then, big scripted series with huge production companies and studios, et cetera. And I think one of the consistent lines is, coming from my background, growing up where I grew up, I am obsessed with this idea of home and like what that means. what is our relationship to home, whether, you're an African-American battle rapper in St. Louis, or you're an exiled Cuban baseball player, or you're a South Asian man looking for your family. I am very, very interested, obsessed with this idea of home and what it means. So it's, if I come onto a project and that's like not staring you in the face, then invariably I'm like drawing that out. It's like, okay, where is this set? There's a project that I'm developing right now, which we're, been honing the pitch the last few months. And it was a British book. It was like South Asian woman protagonist, and it's like couldn't set it in the UK. It has to be set in the US because we want to sell it to one of the big players in the US. But it's like, okay, where is it set? And so very specifically set it in Michigan, in a town in Michigan, and it's about like the relationship of the protagonist and this town and how this town kind of flies apart. Because I need that. There are tons of shows where you don't need that. It's like, where is this set? This is like some diffuse place. I don't know exactly where, but for me personally, it needs to be very specific. I need to know exactly what the character's relationship is to home, the protagonist's relationship to home. Otherwise, I kind of stall out creatively. It's like, I don't know what it's about. I don't know what I'm doing here. And but when I can figure that out, whether it's a scripted project or a nonfiction project, I can run with that.
I love how clear you are about that and the clarity of work. Something else, and talk to me about this. Have you faced any challenges as a person of color in your line of work, whether it's in the U.S. Comparatively to Canada?
Yeah, I mean, I actually have found it harder in Canada, and that's most of my work is in the U.S. Because I don't know, something about that. Maybe it's because where I'm from that I grew up with a kind of American personality. My sister lives in the U.S. and works in the U.S. One of my sisters, the other one works in Canada. But I personally, as someone who is Canadian and sort of binational, U.S. and Canadian, but I think that there has been like a conversation on race that a lot of people are having. Recently, it wasn't just after 2020 and the murder of George Floyd. It was before that, Oscar's So White. But in Canada, Canadians think of themselves as being somewhat superior than Americans and are, I think, still in denial about the degree of racism and injustice in their own country. Whether it's, the residential school system sort of came out and became international news about the abduction and deaths of Indigenous children in Canada, but the same kind of policing issues happen here. And then when you're talking about a career in media, the big difference is that there isn't the media spotlight in Canada to really, if somebody does something messed up, it's like, who's going to write about it in Canada? But in the US, there is the possibility, not saying that it happens often, but there is the possibility that it's like, oh, okay, the Hollywood Reporter is going to write something about this toxic producer, or the New York Times is going to write this piece. And that degree of accountability is kind of lacking in Canada. So in all honesty, some of the most troubling stuff that I've encountered as like a creator of color has been in Canada. And I think part of it is that, that lack of accountability. And one of like the biggest scandals, even in Hollywood, in terms of race, which was the, blanking on the show, which is probably better because I don't want to mention it. But it was actually like a Canadian showrunner, like a white male Canadian showrunner who was, kind of doing some messed up stuff on a network proceduralist because he had come up in this really sequestered, sheltered industry where there isn't a lot of accountability. But the good thing about the US, which is a bad thing sometimes, is like you got to hustle. Otherwise, you got to be on your toes. Otherwise, someone's going to come take your job, and that, for stuff like that, it's like, people feel that some people are still acting in a messed up way. But there is just the media focus in Hollywood in the US, which also helps, some of these toxic people just kind of wash out or get called out.
Absolutely. Well, the accountability, like you said, I think it's changed in the past 3 to 5 years, and people are more vigilant. Well, and then speaking of Hollywood and being here in America, how do you feel that Asian Americans, especially South Asian, are better represented in Hollywood today comparatively to 5 to 10 years ago, both in front of the camera and behind? And what do you feel that we can do to improve the situation?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. 5 years, definitely. 10 years by leaps and bounds, let alone 20, 30 years. One thing that I feel like people, can have an appreciation for is like the battles that were fought before we even got to the table. Because Asian American filmmakers in the 1970s and 80s and earlier were fighting for a seat at the table, were fighting for their communities. And those filmmakers fought a really lonely battle for 2 decades, right? And those are filmmakers who are now in their 60s and 70s, some in their late 50s. So I in this this desire to really celebrate like the now and like, oh, look at this new voice, oh great, and that's cool and all, but yeah, there were people who for 30, 40 years have been fighting to amplify the voices of their communities, in the Asian American community, and they haven't received recognition. So I think making those links between generations is really important, and because history is cyclical too. You can kind of sense this. I don't know if you sense this now, Rasha, but there's like a attempt by some to kind of push back on the gains of the last few years. It's like,
yes,
some of the streamers, it's like, oh, we need to recalibrate to, middle America. Of course, middle America is a stereotype too of what, there are Asian Americans who live in middle America. But I think one of the ways you can sort of maintain the foothold and keep growing is by remembering, the generations that came before us and, what they went through, what they had to deal with, and how they, subverted the system, went around the system, smarted the system, and sometimes lost.
Yeah. I think that's so important. And I'm glad you bring that point up, because they did have a harder fight and struggle than we do right now. And it's important to recognize that we are here because some of those doors that were opened by their fight and by what they created. I still find that there is a balance that needs to be made. I feel sometimes we're still checking off boxes, and it would be great to move beyond the checking off boxes and really recognizing what it means to have representation and how important all of these stories are. And, I have to share with our listeners here too. I follow a lot of the stuff that Sami tweets out. He's very active on social media, especially Twitter. And I love, Sami, that you do speak your mind. You do share what's happening in community and society. But I also see the encouraging words that you share for other filmmakers and how it's not an easy industry for filmmakers. So I'd love to hear from you on how you maintain. How are you so tenacious? What keeps you in the game? Because yes, you have this Oscar nomination, but it's still the next hustle to get the next thing. Just like you said earlier, right? You got to still keep selling the project. So what are your words of wisdom or encouragement, I'd say?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rasha. That's very kind of you. You do so much to amplify the voices of Asian Americans and South Asian Americans in particular. So, you also have received well-earned accolades for your broadcasting. I guess one thing is just in sort of sustaining yourself, on top of sort of finding your people, finding your tribe, but you have to be like obsessed with it, right? I was like saying that earlier. It's like, I'm obsessed with this idea of home. You have to have that like existential drive. And, some people are just obsessed with their careers, and I kind of admire them for that, the way they just like think about their careers and level up like that. I'm not that kind of filmmaker, I'm kind of somebody who really obsesses about I think about my career. Don't get me wrong. I can be like vain and whatever, and like anxious about my career. I think about that stuff a lot. But like the balance of, thinking about the themes and whatnot and the content of it, definitely more than not outweigh that when, probably I should be thinking about my career. And it's like, oh, how much am I getting paid on this project versus this other project?
Right.
I should probably be doing that. So that's one thing, is just being like totally driven and committed to to the material. And then the other thing is like, and this kind of connects to both. I like proving people wrong, because I'm somebody who's like always been counted out, partly, for the way I look, my background, where I come from, etc. But I love proving people wrong.
I love that. Yes, that's what we're here to do.
Yeah, I really love that. I love it. And it's like, the same way, it's like LeBron James, arguably the greatest basketball player of all time. Even he has to deal with so much just like negativity and toxic energy. Even he's getting criticized. So you'd think you get to a certain point where you're, in your late 30s, arguably the greatest basketball player of all time, and people just like chill out. It's like, leave the guy alone.
Right.
It's like, he still has to deal. So if LeBron James has to deal with people counting him out, then
so do we. We got to be prepared for that. I have just a few minutes here, and I've got two questions that I really want to ask you. So real quickly, if you had to pick one film that you produced or directed that you're particularly fond of or holds a special place in your heart, which one would it be?
Yeah, I would go back. I would say my first feature, Koya, which we filmed in India, in my father's hometown. And it stars Rooftop Jin, who, we were friends, acquaintances before, but then we became close friends, and he's one of my best friends. And it also, it goes back because we released the film before the wave of sort of diversity the last 4 or 5 years. And I do wonder sometimes, it's like, oh, how would it be different if the film was released today? But we just, all of us, Rupak, me, the cinematographer, the crew, the producers, had to put so much into that film just to get it in the can, let alone out there, I think a lot of that movie is like really close to
memorable. Yeah. And I know you're also filming a documentary right now on a famous tennis player.
Yes. We're making a feature doc about the great Vijay Amritaj, the greatest Indian tennis player. I know some people might debate that, but to me, he's hands down. No other tennis player in Indian tennis history rivals him in the Open era. And he's an incredible human being. And, my producing partners on the project are great. And, what a story, growing up as a sickly child in Chennai, people saying he wouldn't survive childhood. And then his mom basically becoming obsessed with turning him into India's greatest tennis player and telling him at age 8, you're going to be the greatest Indian tennis player ever. And so the sick boy goes out and becomes, within a decade, the best tennis player in India, surpassing even his older brother, and then goes to Wimbledon, to play Connors, Borg, McEnroe, all of these greats, and then also stands up to apartheid, fights for justice, and builds this legacy of philanthropy, which is unrivaled in the world of tennis.
He's pretty incredible, and I don't think a lot of people know his story, so I'm so glad you're sharing that. Any other projects you want to quickly mention before I wrap us up here?
I should mention that The Last Out, the feature doc I directed with Mike Gassard, is going to be on POV on PBS on October 3rd, and it'll be streaming on Passport, PBS's streaming platform, through October, and then will be available to everybody in November. So I'll plug that there at the end.
Great. Well, we're looking out for that. You know, Sami is someone that I could just speak to for 2 hours because there's still so much I wanted to share. He's also a dad, by the way, guys. So I don't know how he balances all of this. But we are out of time. Sami Khan, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we go, a website or any of your social media handles that you can share for our listeners so they can follow you and learn more about your story.
Yeah, I'm at Sami Khan Film on Instagram and Twitter, so you can follow me there. Thanks so much, Rasha.
It's our pleasure to have you on Asian Voices Radio. And again, just a very inspiring story from where Sami started and his inspiration to where he is now and all the magic he's creating in this industry. Now, if you have any questions or suggestions for our future guests or topics, we'd love to hear from you. You can be sure to subscribe to your favorite podcast platform and find us there, as well as follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And please don't forget, Asian Voices Radio is produced by Asian Culture and Media Alliance, a nonprofit that empowers our API community with the voice through media arts. If you'd like to support us or our program and make a donation, please visit us at asianvoicesradio.com. Once again, thank you so much for listening. We are here to provide you with these beautiful stories and inspire you to follow your dreams. I'm Rasha Goel. Please join us next week for another exciting and thought-provoking Asian Voices radio show. Until then, take care, everyone, and stay safe.